She didn't scream. She didn't cry. But everyone in first class heard the slap. 1 second, she was just a quiet white girl in seat 2A. The next, she was standing, holding her hand, walking toward the back of the plane while the entire cabin stayed silent. What they didn't know, what the flight attendant never even thought to check, was who she really was. And the single message she just sent would cost the airline $3.4 billion. Nyla Carter wasn't trying to stand out. She had boarded early, hoodie on, hair pulled into a loose braid, and sat down without fuss. She didn't make eye contact, didn't pull out a phone or demand anything, just quietly looked out the window like she'd done on a dozen flights before. She was 14, young, yes, but she had the calm stillness of someone who'd been taught not to take up space, until someone decided she shouldn't be there at all. "Excuse me," a sharp voice broke the quiet. The flight attendant's shoes stopped at her row. Nyla looked up. "Yes? That seat's for first-class passengers only." "I know," Nyla said gently. "It's 2A, that's me." The woman frowned. Her name tag read Melissa Grant. "Can I see your ticket?" she said, not asking, demanding. Nyla reached into her hoodie pocket and held it out. Melissa snatched it. Her eyes flicked from the ticket to Nyla, then back, then narrowed. "Are you flying alone?" she asked, louder now. People in nearby seats turned their heads. "Yes," Melissa clicked her tongue. "Sorry, but something's off. You'll need to move to the back." Nyla blinked. "But this is my—" Before she could finish, Melissa reached across her tray table and smacked Nyla's hand hard as she tried to grab her phone. The slap echoed. A few passengers stiffened. One woman gasped, but no one said a thing. Nyla didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply stood up, picked up her small backpack, and walked down the aisle, quiet, steady, past people pretending not to see her. At row 31, she sat down in the cramped back seat, pulled her phone into her lap, and typed one line. She slapped me. I'm in the back. No one said anything. Then she hit send, and everything started to change. The seat was stiff, the armrest was cracked, the tray table wouldn't stay up, but Nyla didn't complain. She sat tucked between two strangers in the very last row of economy, row 31. A man in a wrinkled blazer on her left smelled like coffee and cologne. The woman on her right was already watching a movie with headphones in, pretending not to notice her. Nyla didn't need attention. She just needed space to breathe. Her hand still stung from the slap. She kept her phone face down on her lap and stared out the scratched window. Outside, the jet bridge was still connected. The plane hadn't moved. But inside her chest, everything had shifted. She wasn't just embarrassed. She was angry in a way she didn't know how to explain. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that waited. No one had stood up for her. No one had even asked if she was okay. It wasn't the first time someone assumed she didn't belong. She'd heard whispers before, at restaurants, airports, events with her father. She was used to the looks. But today, Melissa Grant didn't just look at her like she was out of place. She acted on it. She slapped her, in front of everyone, for sitting where her ticket told her to sit. A soft ding rang through the cabin. The boarding complete light above the aisle blinked off. The captain's voice came over the intercom, cheerful and routine, but Nyla wasn't listening. Her phone buzzed. It was a reply from her father. 2 words. "I'm aware." That's all it said. No anger, no panic, just calm. But Nyla knew exactly what that meant. She tucked her phone back into her pocket and glanced at the front of the plane. Distant now, like a different world. Seat 2A sat empty, untouched. Her seat. Her jaw tightened just slightly. She wasn't going to fight. That wasn't how she was raised. She didn't need to yell or scream or demand justice out loud, because the person she just texted, he didn't fight with noise either. And when he moved, entire systems followed. Darius Carter was in the middle of a briefing when his phone buzzed. He didn't flinch, didn't glance at the screen right away. Across from him sat 3 senior officials from the FAA, 2 airport network directors, and a foreign delegate from the EU's Aviation Authority. They were deep in discussion about international flight corridor expansion and ethical compliance benchmarks. But as the others spoke, Darius tapped the screen once. He read the message silently. "She slapped me. I'm in the back." No one said anything. He exhaled slowly. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He'd seen this play out before, on screens, in reports, in boardrooms. He just never thought he'd read it from his daughter. He turned to his executive assistant standing quietly nearby. "Delay outbound movement for any carrier linked to the grid." The man blinked. "Immediate hold?" "Activate GridLock protocol," Darius said calmly. "Full ethics freeze. Effective now." Within 60 seconds, systems across 42 international airports began to lock. 3 airline groups lost real-time access to routing privileges. Their flights stalled. Their towers scrambled. But no one outside the control hubs knew why, yet. Darius stood. The meeting paused. All eyes turned to him. "Family emergency," he said simply, buttoning his suit jacket. "Continue without me." As he stepped into the hallway, his assistant caught up, already holding a secure tablet. "Are we making this public?" "Not yet," Darius replied. "They'll feel the consequences first, then they can ask why." In the elevator, he looked down at the live feed of paused flights. Red flags lit up across the map like warning lights on a damaged cockpit. GridLock wasn't just a tool. It was a system he designed years ago to protect passengers when no one else would. A system the industry thought he'd never use. Until now. Back in row 31, Nyla sat quietly, unaware that the air outside her window had just stopped moving. Her seatbelt was still fastened, her hands still in her lap, and somewhere above her, systems were already falling into place. Melissa Grant stood in the galley with a cup of coffee in hand, smiling to herself. "Handled," she muttered. She took a slow sip, savoring the silence now that the so-called mix-up was out of her section. No more awkward glances, no more teenagers pretending to belong. First class was back to normal, quiet, clean, curated. Kyle, the junior flight attendant, walked in behind her, his face tight with unease. "Was there actually a problem with her ticket?" he asked cautiously. Melissa rolled her eyes. "Did you see her? Hoodie, backpack, phone in hand. She didn't belong here, come on." "But she showed you the seat assignment, didn't she?" Melissa didn't even blink. "Probably borrowed it from someone. You know how kids are. You let one slide in and suddenly everyone thinks it's open seating." Kyle hesitated, then nodded, but his eyes didn't match the motion. Something felt off. Melissa, on the other hand, was feeling just fine. She'd been doing this job for 17 years. She'd seen it all. Fake upgrades, passengers faking status, teens trying to sneak into premium. She prided herself on protecting the cabin, keeping things in order. That girl, whatever her story was, had disrupted that order, and Melissa had corrected it. Simple as that. "First class sets the tone for the flight," she said, half to herself. "It's about expectations." Kyle opened his mouth to say something, but stopped when the overhead chime rang. Ding. The captain's voice came through the speaker, calm but clipped. "Melissa Grant, please report to the cockpit." Melissa blinked. She looked at Kyle, who shrugged. Probably just a routine update. Still, something in her stomach shifted. She put down her coffee, smoothed her uniform, and walked briskly toward the front. As she passed through the aisle, she caught passengers glancing up at her. Some turned away. Others whispered. Her smile stayed on, but her chest felt suddenly tight. She reached the cockpit. The door was already open. The captain didn't smile. "Close the door," he said quietly. Melissa obeyed. The click behind her was soft, but the silence that followed, loud. The cockpit door sealed shut behind her with a soft click. Melissa Grant stood still, Coffee buzz fading fast. Captain Reese Hammond didn't look up right away. He was standing beside the control panel, arms crossed, jaw tight. The first officer sat stiffly in his chair, eyes forward, but clearly listening. Melissa cleared her throat. "Captain, I was told to report—" "You were," he said, voice flat. "Have a seat." She blinked. "Is something wrong?" The captain tapped a screen next to the radio panel. A face appeared on the small monitor. Sharp suit, unreadable expression. "Melissa Grant," the man said. "I'm David Wexler, Director of Flight Ethics and Operations." Melissa stiffened. This wasn't routine. "We've received an incident alert from Executive Command," he continued, "regarding your interaction with a passenger in seat 2A. Melissa's throat tightened. There was confusion during boarding. The young girl, she looked underage, and her appearance didn't match the usual first-class profile. I acted on protocol." Wexler's eyes narrowed. "Did you verify the ticket?" "Yes. I saw it." "Did you verify it against the manifest?" Melissa faltered. "Not directly, but I've worked hundreds of flights. I know when something's off." Captain Hammond finally turned to face her. "What was off, Melissa? Her clothes? Her age? Or the fact that she didn't look like who you're used to seeing in seat 2A? Melissa didn't answer. Wexler leaned forward. "That passenger is Nyla Carter." Melissa blinked. I didn't know who she was." "You didn't need to," Captain Hammond said. "But you should have followed protocol. You didn't. And now we're in a holding pattern because her father activated a system that oversees your ability to take off." Melissa's eyes widened. Wexler continued, calm but cold. "Her father is Darius Carter, architect of the Dignity Grid, and sole controller of the GridLock protocol. You've triggered a full ethics shutdown across 3 airline groups." Silence hung in the air like static. Captain Hammond's tone sharpened. "This plane isn't moving until you make things right." Melissa whispered. "What does that mean?" Wexler didn't flinch. "You're going to walk down that aisle, apologize in front of everyone, and escort her back to her seat." "And if I don't?" The captain didn't blink. "Then you won't be flying at all." Melissa Grant stepped out of the cockpit, feeling like her shoes had gained weight. She smoothed the front of her blazer, lifted her chin, and forced a smile. But her stomach churned. The aisle had never felt longer. Passengers looked up as she passed. Some stared. Others whispered. She used to walk this path with confidence, checking trays, offering champagne, commanding presence. Now, she was on a different kind of walk, one she couldn't charm her way out of. Row 10, row 17, row 23. Eyes followed her the whole way. At the very back of the plane, in the cramped corner of row 31, Nyla Carter sat exactly where Melissa had told her to go. The girl didn't flinch when she saw her, didn't smile, didn't look scared. She just looked steady. Melissa stopped 2 rows away, cleared her throat, and waited a beat. Then, soft and forced, she spoke. "Miss Carter, there's been a misunderstanding." Nyla looked up. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. "I'd like to escort you back to your original seat, in first class." A few heads turned. One passenger pulled out a phone. Nyla didn't respond right away. Melissa tried again. "I also owe you an apology for earlier. My judgment was premature." Nyla raised an eyebrow. "Premature?" she repeated, voice even. Melissa's cheeks flushed. "I misread the situation." Nyla tilted her head. "No, you misread me." The cabin got quieter. Even the hum of the engines felt muted. "You didn't ask for my name," Nyla continued. "You didn't ask for my ID. You just saw me and decided I didn't belong." Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it. "I'll go back," Nyla said, standing. "But not because you asked, because that's where I was supposed to be all along." She grabbed her backpack and stepped into the aisle. The two walked together, past rows of passengers who had watched it all, said nothing, and were now watching again, differently. This time, they weren't just watching her. They were watching them malvos. Row 2A came into view. Nyla sat down without a word. Melissa stood awkwardly beside her, unsure what to say. "If there's anything else you need," she started. Nyla opened her book. "I'm good." Nyla Carter sat in 2A, back where she was supposed to be. The seat felt no different. The leather still creaked. The window still offered the same tired view of the tarmac. But now, the energy around her had shifted, and she felt it. People were looking at her, really looking. Not like before, when they saw a quiet girl in a hoodie and assumed she'd wandered up from Coach. Not like Melissa, who saw her skin, her silence, her age, and decided she didn't fit. Now the stares were different, respectful, curious, guilty. The silence in the cabin wasn't just quiet, it was thick. The kind that comes after everyone realizes they might have been wrong. Across the aisle, a man in a navy business suit gave her a small nod. The woman behind him, who'd said nothing when Nyla was marched to the back, now leaned forward slightly, lips parted like she wanted to say something. But Nyla didn't need anyone's apology. She hadn't come for validation. She came to fly home. She opened her book again, flipping to where she left off. But she could still feel the weight of their glances, 1,000 unspoken thoughts bouncing off her seat back. Meanwhile, back in row 31, Kyle was trying to piece things together. He had overheard parts of the cockpit conversation when the door opened briefly. The name Darius Carter had caught his ear. He wasn't new to the airline industry. He'd been in training when executives from 3 major carriers spoke in hushed tones about access to the grid. And now, those same carriers were frozen, flights grounded, systems offline. And it had all started with that girl. He pulled out his tablet, checked the operations system, read status, locked routing. Across the aircraft, subtle things were changing. A delay warning hit the pilot's console. The captain didn't bother hiding the irritation in his voice as he announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed to remain grounded due to an ongoing routing hold. We appreciate your patience." Some passengers groaned. Others stared at their phones. Nyla didn't react. Melissa stood by the galley, arms folded, stiff. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her name was already being whispered down the rows. She slapped her. Was it really her seat? They said her dad... Nobody finished the sentences, but everyone understood the shift. This wasn't about a seat anymore. This was about who had the power to take it back. Back in seat 2A, Nyla's phone buzzed once. It was a secure text. No name. Just, "The grid has responded. You okay?" She smiled faintly and typed back, "I'm good." And she was. Not because people were finally paying attention. Not because Melissa had been embarrassed. And not because the plane was now stuck in limbo while airlines scrambled to explain why. She was okay because she hadn't let them shrink her. Because her silence had weight. And this time, the world felt it. Across the country, in a room lined with monitors and aviation feeds, Darius Carter stood with arms crossed, watching the fallout unfold. His daughter was in her seat, but the world was finally out of theirs. By the time the wheels lifted off the tarmac, the world was already watching. It started with a passenger's blurry cell phone video. A white girl, barely a teen, being scolded, pushed, and humiliated by a flight attendant in first class. The caption said it all. She had a valid ticket. They made her sit in the back anyway. 10 minutes later, it hit Twitter. 30 minutes after that, it was on 5 viral news accounts with hashtags like #first-class-bias, #whoisNyla, and #slapped-silence. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, Nyla Carter had unknowingly become a trending name. People weren't just angry, they were stunned. How could something like this still happen? Who was this girl? And why was the airline now delaying dozens of flights nationwide? In a downtown newsroom, a junior producer ran to her editor with a laptop. "Sir, I think this is the daughter of Darius Carter." The man looked up sharply. "You sure?" "She's not on social media, but I traced a photo from an old gala. That's her. and Carter's companies are listed as routing partners for the 3 airline groups currently grounded. The editor stood up. Get legal on standby. This is going live in 10. In seat 2A, Nyla still didn't know. She looked out the window, unaware that her name was being spoken in newsrooms, boardrooms, and congressional inboxes. All she wanted was to land and go home. But now, the world was asking questions. Who decided she didn't belong? Why did no one speak up? And how did one silent call shut down half the airspace on the East Coast? Melissa, seated in the jump seat for landing, finally saw the first news clip as a text from a friend. Her face went pale. Kyle looked over and whispered, "You didn't just mess with a passenger. You messed with the protocol." The next morning, the aviation world woke up to chaos. In a tall glass tower overlooking DC, the boardroom of Horizon Alliance, one of the largest airline consortiums in the world, was unusually packed for 6 a.m. Every executive looked tense. On the main screen, a chart showing red status alerts across 3 carriers. Flights canceled, ground routing halted, ethics compliance flagged across the board, but worse than the numbers, the name flashing in bold at the top, Dignity Grid. Access denied. A woman in a navy blazer leaned forward. "This can't be real. He shut us out?" A man across from her, white-haired, grim, nodded. "Yes, Darius Carter pulled full access to the routing grid. We're frozen." Another executive scowled. "Why? Because a flight attendant slapped some teenager?" "He didn't do it because she got slapped," someone else said quietly. "He did it because no one stopped it." Silence. In a smaller room downstairs, FAA Liaison Director Michael Abrams was on the phone. "No, Senator, we didn't authorize the shutdown. No, he didn't ask for approval. He didn't have to." He paused, wiping his forehead. "Yes, sir, because we signed the interoperability agreement 5 years ago. His system oversees 42 international airports and 87 airline carriers. He's not a vendor, he's infrastructure." Click. He hung up. He'd already received 6 other calls like that, 3 from Congress, 1 from the White House, and 1 from Europe. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. How could one man freeze the air? Across the country, in a quiet office in Palo Alto, Darius Carter sat alone, sipping his coffee. Screens lined the wall, each showing compliance reports, airport feed alerts, media sentiment tracking, and legal memos from firms scrambling to understand how their clients lost clearance overnight. But Darius didn't need to read them. He knew exactly what had happened, because he designed it to happen this way. When he built the Dignity Grid 5 years ago, he knew the system couldn't just detect flight path anomalies. It had to track human ones too. "Ethics isn't just technical," he once said, "it's cultural, and culture has to be enforced." This wasn't revenge. It was policy. His daughter had been judged in silence. Now the industry would face the same silence until it earned back its voice. Back in New York, the media storm hadn't slowed. Nyla's face was everywhere, from news panels to op-eds to airport protest signs. Not because she gave interviews, not because she posted videos, but because she didn't. She stayed silent. And in her silence, the public filled the space. "She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't even speak," said one news anchor. But her presence held weight. "She didn't shut down the airlines," another reporter said. "Her father did, but she reminded him why he built the system in the first place." Inside airline headquarters across the US, compliance teams scrambled. ESG investors began asking questions. $3.4 billion in funding was now tied to a single rating: ethics compliant. And thanks to Darius Carter's move, no airline could touch that money until their dignity score was restored. That meant policy overhauls. That meant crew audits. That meant real consequences. And so, without another word spoken from Nyla Carter, the entire system began to shift. Quietly, sharply, permanently. The press room was smaller than usual. No velvet ropes, no PR banners. Just a plain white podium and 2 flags behind it. One American, one corporate. Melissa Grant stood behind the microphone. hands trembling just enough to show. The cameras were already live. She cleared her throat. "My name is Melissa Grant. I've worked as a flight attendant for over 17 years. A pause. "And last week, I made a decision that, at the time, I believed was protecting standards. But in truth, I failed to protect something more important: human dignity." The room was silent. She looked straight at the camera. "I misjudged a young passenger based on appearance, not evidence. I failed to ask questions, I failed to show respect, and I let bias, conscious or not, override protocol." She took a deep breath. "The passenger I wronged is named Nyla Carter. And today, I'm not here because of a lawsuit, or a threat, or an HR requirement. I'm here because the world is watching, and they deserve honesty." She reached into her pocket and unfolded a small note. "This is a handwritten apology, addressed to Miss Carter. Because my actions were public, my apology should be too." She placed the note gently on the podium and stepped back. A few reporters lowered their phones. One even nodded. Melissa wasn't the same woman who strutted down the first-class aisle with false authority. She was shaken, changed, and maybe, finally, aware. Hours later, the clip hit the news cycle. But it wasn't the apology that trended. It was Nyla's response, posted hours after, in a quiet text-based post. "Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. I accept her apology, but I hope this moment becomes more than a headline. I hope it becomes a mirror." In one sentence, she reminded the world that justice didn't always wear a suit or speak loudly. Sometimes, it just sat still and waited for the world to catch up. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m., the press conference began. But this wasn't a flashy event. No intro music, no airline mascots. Just one man, standing behind a sleek black podium with the seal of the Aero Corps Ethics Commission projected behind him. Darius Carter looked straight ahead, calm, precise, unshaken. "Thank you all for being here," he began, voice measured. "The events of the past week weren't just about a mistake on a plane. They exposed a deeper issue, one we can no longer afford to ignore." The room leaned in. He clicked the remote. A screen behind him lit up with 4 bold words: "The Passenger Integrity Accord." "This is not a proposal," Darius continued. "This is now the mandatory standard for any airline using the Dignity Grid." He let that land. Gasps, murmurs, flashes. The accord had been in quiet development for years. Now it was real. Effective immediately, all flight crews must pass quarterly ethics certifications, focused on racial bias, disability rights, and dignity-first service models. Another slide appeared. 42 airports affected. 87 airline partners. 3.4 billion ESG-linked funds frozen until compliance. "The days of silence and unwritten rules are over," Darius said. "From this point forward, any airline that fails to meet minimum ethics thresholds will be locked out of real-time routing access." He paused. "I didn't build the grid to control airspace. I built it to protect the people inside it." Back at home, Nyla watched the live stream from her tablet. She didn't smile. She didn't clap. She just listened. Because this wasn't just her father making a statement. This was a system making a promise. Across the industry, CEOs scrambled to adjust. Legal teams got to work. HR departments panicked. But the public, they finally exhaled. For the first time, a child's humiliation didn't end in silence. It ended in structure. 3 weeks later, Nyla Carter boarded a flight from DC to San Francisco. Same airline, same gate, different story. This time, the moment she stepped into the cabin, everything felt still. A young flight attendant greeted her, not with suspicion, not with fake politeness, but with quiet respect. "Welcome aboard, Miss Carter. Your seat is just ahead. Let me know if you need anything." She nodded, offered a soft "thank you," and moved to 2A. No stares, no whispers, no one asking if she was in the right place. Because now, they knew. As the plane began taxiing, Nyla looked out the window, earbuds in but no music playing. She wasn't trying to block the world out. She was just thinking. So much had changed in 3 weeks. The Passenger Integrity Accord was now policy. 3 airlines had already replaced their training systems. 12 executives had stepped down. And yet, Nyla hadn't posted a single video. She hadn't given one interview. She hadn't said a word on camera. And maybe that was the point. Some change doesn't come from shouting. It comes from quiet power, from people who refuse to shrink just to make others feel more comfortable. As the captain announced takeoff, Nyla finally closed her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she truly belonged. What would you have done if you were on that flight? Let us know in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. This is Telltales, where quiet stories spark global change.